accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey, fellow Owens, welcome back to the podcast of OA. This is episode number 213. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about Green Lantern Beware My Power, the new animated film from the Warner Brothers Features, as well as talking about Green Lantern news and a Know Your Core segment. And I'm joined by my good friend, Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, how are you doing today?
Great, man. Just enjoying the summer. Heat's coming to an end here in the Midwest, and been swimming a lot and playing with Clark and doing family events. And it's been great. Just enjoying it. Feels like forever since we've been on here. It feels like the whole month of June.
It feels like it. We recorded early this month, and we wanted to do this particular conversation, but didn't want to release too far away from the debut of the feature, even though you and I have both seen it already. And just wanted to be fair to listeners who are interested in the movie, but don't necessarily want to be spoiled too much. But yeah, we're going to really dig into it because there's a lot to talk about. That's for sure.
Yeah. And it's going to be a good conversation about it. I want people to take it the wrong way. I mean, we have our opinions on it, and I think they're valid for our reasonings, not just because we want to trash talk or want to praise anything. It's just, we're going to break it down.
That's right. So before we get into all of that, we've got a little bit of Green Lantern news. McFarlane Toys launched an image of a new Necron mega figure, which looks pretty sweet. And then there was this little sweetie of a Parallax figure, which I guess sweetie's a strong term because not thrilled with the Parallax without the gray temples. And there's a couple of the little quirks, like the logo's not right and so on. But it's interesting, this Parallax figure, people thought that it was going to be attached to their CollectorCon event, which was going on to tie in with San Diego Comic-Con, and it never showed up that way, but it is a Walmart exclusive. It's interesting.
I mean, does anything ever work out with DC Comics? Any other marketing employees or anything?
It doesn't seem to, man. I tell you. Speaking of San Diego Comic-Con, where was Warner Brothers? I mean, holy cow. They showed footage, they had The Rock there, and they showed some footage of Black Adam, and they had a panel and stuff about Shazam. I can understand they avoided the Ezra Miller and Amber Heard issues by not talking about Aquaman 2 and the Flash films, but there was no conversation about any of the stuff being worked on or a timeline for things, or there was not even any conversation about the new season of Stargirl or anything. So
let me seg into this real quick because I text you over the weekend. I was like, man, what I wouldn't give to be there, and every year this comes around, I even have this conversation with my wife, she actually made a little hypothesis the other day. She's like, let me pose this to you. If you choose between San Diego Comic-Con, and I stopped her right there. I said, no, stop right there. I already know where you're going. And she was going to go to the Dave Matthews Band when they play up in the Gorge. It's a 3-day event, and it's huge, and I've always wanted to go. And anyway, so back to Comic-Con, and every year it comes around, or it gets interesting because the news comes out, and you're always looking forward to hearing stuff. And I can't explain this enough to our listeners, do a search for San Diego Comic-Con news, just on any Google. You won't see DC anything unless you scroll down. It's going to be all Marvel, Phase 5, Phase 6. They put on such an extravagant event for Wakanda Forever that will, put people to tears. It was beautiful. Where does DC fit into this? I don't know. You got Marvel, and DC does nothing. They don't even. It's almost like they're non-existent or don't care. Or it might be a strong word, but at the same time, it's like I do a random search, and I went to like San Diego Comic. I wanted to hear the big news, and so I just did a random thing, and I went to this place called Polygon. There was at the bottom of the page. After I scrolled forever, is where the DC news was. Everything before it was about Guardians of the Galaxy. Everything before it was about Marvel. Everything before it was about the two new Avengers films coming out, and then everything about Don Cheadle coming back as War Machine, and so on and so forth. And you get flooded with all this information. And it makes me literally sad to be a DC Comics fan that I'm not given anything that I want to look forward to. And I'm not trying to say this to be a bitter fan, or I'm not trying to say this because I'm trying to rail. I'm saying this because it's honest. I mean, people want information for stuff. That's why they go to these events. My God. I mean, look how much money people spend. And to not get any DC stuff? Nah, man, sorry. I don't think that's cool. I think it's bad marketing. I think it's really, really bad for DC Comics to not put forth a fueled effort into a lot of their stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of disheartening because when DC moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, a lot of the conversation that went on then was, well, DC's not going to have a presence at the New York Comic Con because everything is shifting to the West Coast, and San Diego Comic Con will be the big thing. But we've kind of seen this slow pull back from all of that. And we know there's the merger and all that stuff going on. But at the same time, you can't pass up an opportunity like this. And
no.
They've yet to announce a fandom. So is there going to be even a fandom? But to have, you've got, just like Warner Brothers, like Disney has with Marvel, you've got the movies and you've got Disney Plus. On the DC side, you've got movies and you've got HBO Max. And there wasn't anything there to really get fans excited except for those two films. And I don't take anything away from those two films, but there's got to be more of a slate or more of a vision. When Marvel is releasing 2 more phases and giving you kind of the timeline of what's going to happen and what kind of content to expect.
Right.
That's just,
that's years in advance, man. I mean, you're
exactly
talking years in advance. And here's another sad part that a lot of people don't realize when it comes to these events and whatnot. DC Comics, as a whole, they have to rely upon their fans to be able to maintain, to be able to move forward, to be able to launch whatever they're going to do or whatever phases they're going to get into or whatnot. But when you have a silent voice, merger or not, and you're not putting forth an effort to reach your public domain, I just don't see how you can gain any kind of a base with your fan to have some kind of a comfortable dialogue on what your plans are moving forward. It just it makes no viable sense to me. I mean, you and I sit here and we do this podcast, and I'm an educator, you're an educator, and we work these mediocre jobs. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert when it comes to everything DC Comics and Green Lantern and so on and so on and so forth, but at the same time, you cannot give me a reason. You cannot have a DC representative come up to me and argue to me why they're not doing anything right now, or why there's no fuel in their presence, why there's no gusto. The last thing you heard about HBO Max was Zack Snyder's Justice League. That was it. That was the last time DC did anything that had to promote HBO Max or pushing HBO Max or anything. Zack Snyder's Justice League coming to DC or coming to HBO Max. After that, what are they doing over there? Okay, well, I mean, sure, they're coming out with their shows and everything like that, but they're not coming out with any big launches or big newses.
No.
Think about it like this: do a Comic-Con and do live content on your HBO Max platform. There you go. How hard would that be?
Right, stream your panels.
Duh. I mean, right there, that's a simple thing. That wouldn't even cost them anything. That's like profit. There you go, HBO Max. I just gave you profit in DC. Yeah. But anyway,
it's interesting. It's disheartening and interesting at the same time. I don't know. It's funny because I've listened to, or I shouldn't say listen to. I've read comments from Jeff Thorne over on the CBR message boards, and he talks about how the studios don't really care about the fans. They're looking more for the mass market appeal.
Yeah.
But on the other side of that coin is, well, if that's the case, I mean, we know fan service is a part of the equation to really get people hyped up. But if it didn't matter, then why is anybody at San Diego Comic-Con? Because that's your niche audience. That isn't the general population.
Yeah.
So, but then again, I don't think he's particularly that intelligent. But anyway.
I bet you he doesn't have like I'm willing to bet he doesn't have like a really, really boisterous voice when it comes to big level executive decisions. So we'll just leave it at that.
No, he still doesn't know whether he's writing Green Lantern going down in the road or not.
Yeah.
He has no idea what's going on. Anyway, the last bit of information isn't really news or anything. I just wanted to give a shout out to a Podcast of Oa listener, Santiago, who is from Argentina. He has messaged us a few times, and he is going to be in the United States in August. He's going to be in New York and the Philadelphia area. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Santiago when you're here. I hope you have a great trip. I hope you find some comics, because I know you messaged me offline about some comic stores in the New York, Philadelphia area. So I hope you find some good things while you're here, and I really hope you enjoy your trip.
Yeah, good times, Philly. That'd be a really good time.
All right, my friend. Well, we have a movie to talk about, and we've got some listener feedback and a Know Your Core segment. So let's take a quick break, and then let's dive right into it.
All right.
This is Robert Vendetti, and you're listening to the Podcast of Oa.
Fellow Owens, welcome back to another Know Your Core segment. Happy to be here. Here we go with a cool one. This man goes by the name of Barin Char. Now, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Could be Barin. Could be Barin Char. Anyway, he hails from Sector 1522. Comes from the creator Ron Mars. His first appearance was in Green Lantern vs. Aliens #1, September of 2000. And the appearance of his death was Green Lantern vs. Aliens #1, September of 2000. During his time in the Green Lantern Corps, Barin Char had the opportunity to serve with other Green Lanterns, including Kilowog of Bolivax Vic. It was on a border world in his sector that Barin Char met his gruesome fate. Rest in peace, Barin Char. Long live the Corps. Thank you, fellow Owens, for another cool member of the Know Your Core segment.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the Podcast of Oa escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light.
All right, Phil, we're here for the meat of the episode. We're going to talk about Green Lantern, Beware My Power. So it has been 11 years since we had a Green Lantern-centric animated film. That was when we had Green Lantern Emerald Knights back in 2011. It was when we had Green Lantern, the animated series. And here we are, 11 years later, talking about another Green Lantern movie. And this one has John Stewart as the central core of it. And before we dig into the movie, this is going to have spoilers in it. So if you have not seen it yet, we're going to release this on Monday, July 25th. So it's a day before the movie is technically released. But if you haven't seen it and you're sensitive to the spoilers and don't want to know what's going to happen, you might want to skip it or not. If you're on the fence about watching it because you've heard some bad things, because it's gotten some pretty negative reviews already, if you're looking for two Green Lantern fans' opinions to help drive your opinion, by all means listen away. And I also want to preface it with something else. This movie was hard for me to review because there are two people attached to it that I have a great deal of respect for. One is Jim Krieg, who was the co-producer on Green Lantern, the animated series. And I've had the fortunate experience of interviewing Jim Krieg when we did a retrospective on Green Lantern, the animated series. And back when we did that, he was working on another show called, I think it was Spookyville or Spooksville. And he actually asked me to record an episode of their episode commentary for him because the person that normally did it couldn't make it. And so I pitched in and helped him out. He's involved as a producer on this film, and Ernie Altbacher, who wrote 7 episodes of Green Lantern, the animated series. He also wrote some Justice League action. He co-wrote Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, which honestly I didn't particularly care for, but he also wrote Batman Hush, the animated film. He's a great guy. He's actually somebody who called me one time. He called me on my cell phone. I was sitting in the parking lot of a Subway, and he called me, and we chit-chatted for a little while, and he was really appreciative of the reviews I did of the animated series because I kind of did some deep dives on the writing and really praised the writing of the show. And he actually sent me a copy of a young adult book that he wrote and asked me to write a review on Amazon. So it's going to be a little hard for me to talk about this because I did not like this film at all. And I don't, I'm hoping that the two of them, if they listen to this, they probably won't, but if they do, or if they read my review online, they don't take my critical commentary personally, because it's nothing against them. I have nothing but the greatest respect for them. And another individual involved with this particular movie is John Semper, who is an animation veteran. He worked on the original Super Friends show and Static Shock and Justice League Action and the Spider-Man animated series. So you've got three people who've got a breadth of history and experience in working with superhero properties and fan service. And that brings us to Green Lantern, Beware My Power.
So when before we go there, keep in mind too that when you're watching whatever you're watching, like this or something else, more often than not, and you can pinpoint where its issues are. I mean, if you're hardcore enough fan, and Green Lantern fans know this, and hell, any comic book fan knows this, you can pick and parts that you might think are good or might think are bad, but it's not always just the writing that's bad, and it's always the production or producing that's bad. A lot of it comes from either creator ideas or some kind of push from the executives that want to drive a certain storyline or whatever the case may be. So a lot of times, in defense of the friends that Myron mentioned, these guys are under constraints to have to produce what they have to produce. Now, I don't speak for them, obviously, and I don't speak for this film. I speak enough to know as a fan that I think that their decisions are probably earmarked by executives at DC. So I'm willing to bet that the way this was made wasn't the way that it was originally wanted to be made. And I'll leave it at that.
And that's quite possible. To read some of the online interviews, I hear them say that, Jim Krieg had the idea to do this film, whether it's exactly the plot that he wanted to do. I don't know.
Right.
All we can do is talk about
it doesn't matter anyway.
Right.
It really doesn't matter.
All we can do is talk about the execution of the film, right? And the final product. That's, at the end of the day, that's all that really matters.
Yeah.
This is essentially a John Stewart origin story. John in this movie is very much like the DC animated universe version, which people seem to like. Although this version of John is dealing with PTSD, and he's lashing out a little bit. When he first gets the ring, he really doesn't want the ring. In fact, he spends probably the first third of the movie trying to figure out how to get rid of the ring. Which is interesting. But the whole origin of how John gets the ring is probably the first part of the film that has rankled a number of people. And it's primarily because he gets Kyle Rayner's origin, essentially.
Yeah. It's stupid.
He's getting Ganth that crashes to Earth. He doesn't live, though. He dies. But then the ring goes to John, and basically Ganth crashes on Earth and says, thank God, John Stewart, I was looking for you. Don't know why, but he was. And he dies, and out of the, he crumbles to ashes or what have you, disappears into energy or whatever. And the ring comes out and attaches itself to John Stewart, and boom, you're up and going. And John goes off and meets with the Justice League. And the Justice League at this point really only comprises of Martian Manhunter and Vixen and Green Arrow. Everybody else is off doing stuff, as is often the case. And it becomes almost a buddy movie with Green Arrow and John Stewart. Would that be an accurate assessment from your perspective?
Yeah. It was, well, and I really liked their kind of camaraderie throughout that. I thought that was kind of genuine and unique. I really like the way they played off each other. I do want to earmark your point on what you brought up about his origin story. And this is where I take a lot of umbrage, first off, with this particular animated film. This goes deeper than just what fandom recognizes. And let me explain. Your base fandom isn't going to know the difference between an origin story. Sure, you might know Clark Kent landed in Kansas in a rocket ship, and you might know Bruce Wayne's parents were murdered, but that's the only identifiable trait when it comes to like a specific origin story. here's my issue, and I will defend Jon Stewart in this manner. And I'm not even a Jon Stewart fan, so people need to understand this is, and I'm defending him. You're going to create a Green Lantern film. You can't slapstick another origin story on top of on a character for two reasons. Number one, you just diminish the character because you're attaching another origin story on him that has nothing to do with him. Number two, the unfortunate accident of this film is they whitewashed him. You know, you're giving a white character, let alone it's Kyle Rayner, so we all know that he has Mexican heritage?
Yeah, for Kyle, he's Mexican and Irish.
Yeah, so you're taking that individual's character traits and implementing on an origin story onto an African American individual. Now, that may sound like a good idea, but I think it's wrong because you just stripped Jon Stewart of his identity. You just kind of undermine Jon Stewart. I don't even like Jon Stewart, and I feel sorry for what you just did to him. And that's my first problem.
But I mean, you couldn't do a literal version of his original origin, but you could certainly adapt it and make it a little bit different.
Yeah.
And if I could summarize this movie, I think it's like if you took Emerald Twilight, Zero Hour, and the Rann-Thanagar War and put them in a blender and flipped it on high and dumped it out, this is what you'd have.
That's exact. And you know, it's funny you mention that because after I watched this and I go, something feels familiar to this. I went back and read the 6-issue Rann-Thanagar War arc, and I go, well, there it is. I knew it felt familiar somewhere. Mm-hmm. So, and then of course your Emerald Twilight, you know, you got Parallax Hal, you know, going nuts with all the rings. And I was like, come on. This is what you're going to do? You're going to put all this Green Lantern lore in a blender?
Yeah.
And you're going to slapstick it and put it in people's face?
It's almost like Jon Stewart becomes a co-star or becomes a supporting character in his own movie because the Rann-Thanagar War really takes center stage. And so there's a lot of stuff going on with Adam Strange and Rann and Thanagar. Shayera Hall makes an appearance in the film as well. And I'm sure that's a wink and a nod to the Justice League cartoon, but I've never been a fan of that relationship. I never felt like it was cool for Shayera to be, you know, Jon Stewart to be dating Carter Hawkman's wife, essentially.
Right.
That wasn't, you know, that doesn't resonate with me. I know it resonates with some of the audience that's out there, I'm sure, because of that. Some of them just love the DC animated universe, and Justice League Unlimited and so on. For me, not so much, but the Rann-Thanagar War really jumps into the forefront. And then we find out that Sinestro is behind the Rann-Thanagar War, and Sinestro is portrayed as an agent of chaos, that he thrives on chaos. Well, that's not Sinestro at all. No. Sinestro thrives on order, or he's for order at any cost. So,
and he's a tactician. He's smart.
Yes. Yeah. And you see, you know, his play here isn't like, he's not Joker crazy, but this is like if you had a sane Joker. Who's trying to plant the seeds of chaos between Rann and Thanagar. For what reason, we never really find out, other than for his master to get a hold of this Rannian weapon and use it to wipe out the entire universe and rebuild it, which is where we start getting into Emerald Twilight. But I want to stick with Sinestro for a minute because Sinestro, he's out of character. That's for sure. But his character design, you know, he's back to he's got a beard and mustache combo, which looks just so bizarre. And then even though he's got the Sinestro Corps logo on his power ring, the logo on his chest looks nothing like the Sinestro Corps logo. I mean, if they could get it in minute detail on a power ring, why not on his chest? And when Lyssa Drax shows up, she has that symbol on her chest. So what is up with Sinestro not looking like the Sinestro Corps version of Sinestro? That part threw me out as well. But then when we discover that Hal Jordan is not dead and that Hal sent his ring off to prevent Sinestro from getting it, I was a little positive there for a little bit. So I'm like, oh, this is cool. Maybe we're going to get a buddy scene thing. And that's why now I understand why Green Arrow's along for the ride, you know, and Green Arrow's also there because he adds much needed character and charisma because none of the rest of the cast had it.
No, he was actually probably the best characterized person in that particular anime because I liked him and I liked who voiced him. I liked his etiquette. and I like the way he talked. I mean, he was great.
Yeah. I mean, it just, and I don't want to bash Jon Stewart, the character, but neither one of you are particularly big Jon fans. But to me, it underscored why Jon Stewart can't carry a solo project. He has to be propped up by other people, because the way he's written, in the case where they're gonna get in bed with the DC animated universe version, he's a thinker, he's a tactician, yada yada yada. He's basically Batman without any of the interesting character plots. So they tried to add the PTSD thing to it, but it really doesn't get executed very particularly well. That's for sure.
They could have done better at it.
Yeah, and in the voice acting, I don't want to knock the voice acting too much. I mean, you've got a name brand actor. You've got Aldous Hodge doing the voice of Jon Stewart. But the performances, other than Jimmy Simpson as Green Arrow, the performances were so wooden. And it just made it incredibly boring. But
I knew when it was coming out. I already knew when I heard about it, you weren't going to like it, And I knew when I watched it, I was like, well, I already know what Myron's going to feel, so I'm just going to sit on my phone and wait for a text message that I know is going to come, And it's not. And here's the thing: like at the end of the day, I was like, I liked watching it. I'm not going to lie. I thought the animation was done well. I just don't like laziness. Yeah. And if you're going to produce something like this, why do you choose, as a producer, as a company, as an agency, why would you choose to go this route, and how you would assemble a project like this?
Yeah.
When you could have been simple. Think of another target audience that they overlooked. Let's focus on his PTSD, Jon Stewart's PTSD. Number one, that could have been written out that whole show. That could have been the focus point, a part of his origin story, focus point. Then you attract different readers, because then you're attracting military personnel that maybe exhibit those same effects, or it's a far stretch, but it's something to add depth to Jon Stewart's character, instead of just, I don't know, man. This was just executed poorly, and I think they could have done a lot better, and I think they should listen to people.
Well, yeah. And then, when we find out Hal's alive, like I said, I was hoping there was some good opportunity for things. And I went into it based on the trailer. I kind of thought I wasn't going to like it. But let me, before I get into more of the plot, some things that I did like, and they echo some of the things that you just said, Phil. I liked the overall animation style. I liked the color tones and the palette. I liked the fight choreography, except for one big guffaw we're going to get into later. And I also really liked how Green Lantern energy was depicted, because normally when you see it, it's just a stagnant, non-moving energy source. It's like a beam of light. Here it was like energy. It crackled, it had energy properties, and I really did like that.
And I like it because it was cool how Jon Stewart really got behind how he developed using the ring, and I liked how he was progressing too, because. I mean, granted, he didn't want it at first, right? But then, later on, he started basically succumbing to it, knowing he had to just deal with it, use it for the time being to get through what he needed to get through. And in doing so, he did it really, really well. I thought that part of his portrayal was done fluidly.
Yeah. I think the one thing I liked about the Ring AI, even though I didn't like the male voice for the Ring AI, I did like that the Ring could teach the user how to use it a little bit. So there was kind of like a built-in FAQ on the Ring,
right?
Kind of exercises, some very rudimentary exercises. That's not going to replace Kilowog training, that's for sure. But I did like those things. So I don't want people to think I thought it was all negative. That's not the case. What really got me was wooden voice acting, and some of the plot narrative writing choices for me are just, And it goes back to, we get to the third act and we see Hal being much more brutal than we normally would see. Although, again, you can imagine this situation. He's been tortured for a period of time. He doesn't have a ring. He's using a gun or a mace to fight people. He's not taking any prisoners. And as an audience person, as somebody who's very familiar with the Hal character, I'm like, well, okay, I guess I can understand if this situation is that dire. I can see where, he's not intentionally doing it, but the person ended up dead. Maybe a little over gung-ho, especially when he got the gun. And as soon as Ollie starts to question it, I'm like, okay, I know where this is going now. It's forecasted. It's not even subtle where they're going. And you find out that Sinestro's master is Hal, and that Hal has been infected by Parallax. So they not only do Emerald Twilight, but they also do the Green Lantern Rebirth of Emerald Twilight, where they use Parallax the creature. So Sinestro infects Hal with the Parallax entity, and then suddenly Hal has this awakening, and he basically decides to break bad on purpose. Like there's no, for as rushed and as poorly written as I felt the original Emerald Twilight comic book story was written, this is worse because there's no motivation for him to embrace Parallax at all, other than to show power corrupting, or other than position him to be taken off the table, which is nonsensical to me, because we're building a Tomorrowverse in the DC animated universe, and you've essentially taken your most popular Green Lantern character off the map.
Yeah, right.
Which is silly. And what's funny is as an audience person, I'm watching this. Okay, well, he killed two characters in this film. And as we see during the flashback, when he's coming out, you see Sinestro basically taking down a whole bunch of veteran GLs. Hal's naked at that point for some crazy creative choice. And we see John use lethal force to kill Sinestro. So you've also taken Sinestro off the table. Mm-hmm. But he uses his ring to kill Sinestro by pulling his ring through Sinestro rather than around him. So he doesn't have that good of control, because he could have controlled where the ring went. But anyway, and then Ollie at the end of the movie kills Hal, and that's okay. He
seemed okay with it at the end.
Well, that was the other thing is that not only does Ollie not bring Hal's body back to Earth for a proper burial, he leaves his dead body out there. But he comes back and he's like, yeah, I killed my best friend. Hey, you want to go get something to eat? Which I was like, man. And I suppose not having the body and not doing anything with the body of Sinestro or Hal leaves the door open for them to come back in some way. Because, we've seen in the Star Wars films, people survive getting killed or being impaled with lightsabers. Heck, Darth Maul survived being cut in half by a lightsaber. So we don't have a sad
trope. It's an old trope. Why bother with it?
Right.
There's no need to pull that card.
Yeah.
To take what you said about this mashup of Beware My Power. This thing could have been written in an entirely different way and had the same outcome without killing Hal Jordan, without killing Sinestro. Mm-hmm. Simple as that. You could still do the same story if you really wanted to. I'm not going to agree with that because I think it's lazy writing. I didn't see any ingenuity in this.
No.
And we keep going back to what you're taking, the Rand Thanagar War, Emerald Twilight. If you're going to mash it up because of previous content, that's fine, but do it with the right character. Do it with Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart had nothing to do with Emerald. Well, he didn't have nothing to do with Emerald Twilight.
And I get that John got some training by the ring, and he's had a couple of fights with his power ring. But to defeat a Hal Jordan, who's the air quote greatest Green Lantern of all time, according to what they say in the movie, who is infected with Parallax and has 10 power rings and the power of Parallax in him. I'm sorry, but no. He's beaten by a rookie Green Lantern and a guy with a bow and arrow. And to go back to the moment when Hal is killed, what a major screw up. You've got, Hal is over John. He's standing over John. And the arrow comes in from behind. Hal looks up and sees Ollie. Ollie was in front of him, but the arrow came in from behind.
God, I didn't pick that part up.
And there were some other characters that we see in this, which I was excited to see some deep dives and seeing, we saw Lyssa Drak, we saw Kanjar Ro, we saw Despero. All of them were, beaten up very easily and shouldn't have been that easy to defeat, but they did. But then we saw when Sinestro was attacking Oa, we saw Tomar 2, we saw Kahan, Boudica, Salak, General Creon, Gallius Zed, Iolande, Raker Karragat. There were a lot of characters that we got to see. Granted, they didn't say anything. They were cannon fodder. Were all killed by Sinestro pretty easily by some yellow energy arrows because they're still doing the yellow impurity thing. I don't know.
Hey, side note question to another character, Hawkgirl.
Yeah.
How come every portrayal of Hawkgirl is usually always done really well? I mean, the animated series, she was just phenomenal. In this, she was great. I loved her in this. I thought she was another great character in this. I didn't think she had a lot of, she didn't have as much personality as Green Arrow did, but I mean,
but none of them did.
Yeah, she had a lot of fuel in this, though. I thought she had.
Yeah, I mean,
I like her character anyway. I like Hawkman too. I've always seen Hawkgirl in different things, and she's genuinely done really well, and nobody seems to have any kind of beef with how she.
Well, she's consistent with how we've seen her in the Justice League animated series.
Yeah.
She's there obviously for two reasons: A, you've got Ranthanagar War, so you need a Thanagarian, and B, to do some fan service to Jon Stewart fans who love the DC Justice League cartoon, fans that loved that show. It gives you that, even though, and that was the other thing I thought was a little odd though about her, was in the beginning she's all she's very blustery and so on, and at the end she kind of softens up to him, and I don't know if they were trying to kind of lay the groundwork for a relationship between these two down the road, but it came out of the blue and it seemed very forced.
I mean, are you talking about him and Jon Stewart and Shiara?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you talk about relationships, and I know that's like a focus point with when it comes to material content or whatnot, but when it comes to Jon Stewart, I've always liked him with Fatality. I always thought they were a cool kind of combination. Looking forward, who else would you pot? Joe Mullane? I don't think that would be anything. I think that would be kind of weird.
I don't know. I honestly, I always liked John and Kat Matui, but we know that's not going to happen.
No. And Fatality won't happen because who knows where she's at now.
Well, and Fatality was a clone, wasn't she? Or wasn't she a Durlin?
Oh, that's right. She was.
Yeah, that was when she fell for John. It wasn't really her.
That's right. Durlin.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just, I wish they would have done better. I'll put it this way: for fans that like Jon Stewart, if you like this, that's cool. I mean, that's great. That's good for you, and I hope you guys get something out of it. But I will say, I feel like they could have done 100 times better with his storyline.
Yeah. So
they could have done 100 times better with how he was portrayed, especially with not piecemealing them together or patchwork.
What's the one Green Lantern story that everybody keeps asking to have adapted into an animated film?
Oh, well, it's either Blackest Night or Sinestro Corps War.
Correct. So you could have done Sinestro Corps War, and you could have prefaced with a bar fight between Hal and John, with Hal in the Air Force and John in the Marines. And then you have the Sinestro Corps War, and the Guardians decide they need 2 Green Lanterns per sector, and John gets recruited. And now you have these two guys that don't really get along, but still somewhat respect each other. And you've got John, the real serious guy who's following the rules, being exposed to the Green Lantern universe, and Hal, the rogue. So you get the lethal weapon, not the age connection, but you get the lethal weapon dynamic.
Sure.
Which is what I was hoping for a film, to see something along those lines. You could have done something like that, and it would have been much more entertaining because you would have had Hal and John to play off of each other. You could have shown 2 characters with similar backgrounds that should be getting along well, and probably unarguably the 2 most popular Green Lanterns, although I would say in some cases Kyle Rayner is more popular than Jon Stewart, depending on who you're asking. You have those 2 characters together in a buddy cop. I hate to hesitate to use the word cop, but a buddy film fighting against Sinestro. And you could have had a much better film that would have done fan service, still introduced people to Jon Stewart, and you didn't have to drive Cal Jordan over with a yellow bus to get rid of him.
Yeah, and you could have even written it in a way where Jon Stewart was still your main character in the film.
Right. You're seeing things through that. Something happens to Hal. Maybe Hal gets possessed by Parallax as part of the Sinestro Corps, where like Kyle was, and John rescues him. You could do the same thing. There's a bunch of different ways you could slice this pie and get a lot better dessert than what we got.
Yeah. So when you go back to like the people who, I don't know, we'll go back months, or I don't even know how long these things go into production, right? So we'll just say, for the sake of argument, a year. You got these people sitting in these rooms and they're playing. Well, we need to put a DC animated feature out there. We've already done such and such. Well, let's do a Green Lantern one, right? Now, I'm hypothesizing here. So these guys are sitting around in their room talking about whatever they're talking about, okay? And they come up with this grand design on Beware My Power. But yet, they gloss over how many years of Green Lantern content and of viable storylines that are recognizable, that people know that could have done better. And then they produce this and put it out there when people don't know anything about stuff like this. I mean, like, I guess when you want to attract new viewers, you're looking at this as it's an origin story for Green Lantern. It's John Stewart. Hey, this is cool. Sure. I mean, if you get in on the ground level with a new viewership, they're not going to know the difference between John Stewart where his origin came from. I mean, for all they know, he could have he's an alien. It's not my point. The point is, then you get your John Stewart fan base involved. No, that looks different. It's not his origin story. I don't like that, and so on and so forth. Well, that's what causes your schism, right? I mean, that's what loses your viewership. That's what loses your readers. That's what loses your fan praising. And if you don't have somebody sitting in this room of these people making these meetings for this content, and that voices this kind of stuff, then what are you creating, or what's your vision for what you're creating, or why are you creating it then?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well,
because you're not gearing like it's Sinestro Corps War. You talked about it. If you're going to create that is a direct target towards a specific audience of Green Lantern fans. Number one, that really, really draws a lot of attention, because you and I both know, you put a poll out there. Give me the top three. You know it's going to be one of them.
Mm-hmm. And I guarantee Emerald Twilight wouldn't be in the top 10.
Right. So these guys are sitting around this room. You mean to tell me that nobody in this room that said anything? Hey, I don't know. I like your Beware My Power idea, but Sinestro Corps War, and I don't like the way you're taking another origin story and sticking it on an African American guy. You're whitewashing him, for crying out loud, you know. And then you're taking Emerald Twilight. It's like, does anybody sit up in this room and say these things?
Yeah, you have to assume that they knew what they were doing. I mean,
yeah.
Jim Krieg is familiar with the lore because he worked on the animated series, and look how well they boiled that down to its bare essence. This is a situation where it just seems like it was lazy writing. And from what little I've read, and I've tried to avoid some of it, but what little I've read, this story's been worked on for the last couple of years. So I can't imagine they don't know what they're, yeah, I know. I can't imagine they didn't know what they were doing, but why would you pick the most divisive story? And I think it's a slap in the face to John Stewart to give him somebody else's origin because you think that his origin isn't good enough as it is. I think there's different ways you could have, like I said, there's different ways you could have cut this pie and gotten a better dessert. That's for sure. Even down to like John Stewart's costume design. Holy cow. That looked like a bad jumper. That was awful. But
I'll say it. I wish you John Stewart fans that, you know, like I said, if you like it, cool, man. That's your jam, and I love you. I love y'all for it. I don't even like John Stewart, and I think that John Stewart could have excelled even more so. Sorry.
It could have been done much better.
Yeah.
I know there's a section of John Stewart fans that love it because it took Hal off the table. There's a section of fans that are like that, but you know, I don't know if it's fair, but I think it's pretty juvenile, but
it is, and to each their own with fandom, and I don't think fandom needs to be that way. I mean, it's kind of silly. I mean, there's room for everybody, and at the end of the day, you don't need to be like that. Oh, well, they need to get rid of him because of this. And the only reason somebody needs to be there's nobody in the comic book world that needs to be really getting rid of. There's nothing that they've ever done that's been that atrocious to where you can take a character and just say he should be gone forever. It doesn't happen, and it will never happen.
And I would argue that, you know, I remember when the Green Lantern live action film was coming out, and there was a section of the population who, when they saw it was Hal Jordan, had no idea who he was because their only exposure was the Green Lantern, the DC Justice League cartoon. And I feel that was a smaller part of the audience than what people would like people to think it is. But at the same time, if you're introducing this and you're making this for the mainstream audience, what have you told them about Green Lantern? And how do you do anything with Hal at this point if you've trashed him once again to prop up another character? It seems very short-sighted. The other point I want to make is I was watching the end credits, and I think they credited Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams as they should for the creation of John Stewart. They credited Gardner Fox and Murphy Anderson for Adam Strange. They credited Dave Gibbons and Jeff Johns for Alyssa Drack. But they didn't credit Ron Mars and Daryl Banks for Parallax. They also didn't credit Jeff Johns and Ethan Van Sciver for the creation of the Parallax entity. None of those guys got any credit whatsoever for those two pieces that were in the story. And what is up with the art design for Parallax? Because it looked like crap.
I wasn't even going to go there because I didn't even think it was worth mentioning. I'll let people draw their own conclusion about Parallax.
It sucked hard.
That's interesting about the credit stuff.
Yeah,
when I was looking through them too. I did notice I didn't see John's name anywhere much in it.
Yeah,
he was in there a couple things, but not for creator.
Jeff Johns, he was there for the creation of Alyssa Drack, and that was it. But they ignored, they used Parallax, but they didn't credit anybody who created Parallax in it, which I thought was interesting. But the design of the Parallax outfit, if you want to call it an outfit, really sucked. As much as I didn't like Emerald Twilight, I did like the design of the costume that Daryl Banks came up with, albeit the shoulders I thought were very, like, you couldn't lift your arms, but whatever. But I thought...
What did you think of Bearded Hal?
I could go with it because he was a prisoner. I can go with that. That's okay.
Okay.
But the John Stewart's design, oh my God. It looked like a bad set of pajamas. It was bad.
And even with that, they could have deployed like a new creative new design, like something cool, something nuanced for John Stewart.
There's a faction. There's a section of, and I'm sure the people listening to this episode, they're going to say the same thing, but at least it's Green Lantern content, and I'm going to buy it to support it because it's Green Lantern. And the problem with that is the message you're sending is not only do I want more Green Lantern content, I want more Green Lantern content like this.
Yeah.
And the only thing DC understands and Warner Brothers understands is your money. If you give them money, they're going to say, oh, you want that? Then we're going to make a sequel to that. I don't want a sequel to this piece of crap. I quite frankly don't. And I don't buy the notion of, well, make up your own mind and rent it and buy it for yourself. No, because in doing so, you're giving them money. You're giving them what they need to. You're endorsing it by buying it. It's like the Jeff Thorne run. I'm a Green Lantern completionist. I'm now 6 issues away from having the entire Silver Age run. But when I'm done with that, I know I've got issues with Kyle to buy because there for a while I stopped buying. I've got some issues of Green Lanterns to buy because I didn't buy that either. And I've got issues of the Thorne run that I'll buy. But as far as I'm concerned, no dollar bin will escape their sight. So I'll find them at some point really cheap. But I'll go down that road, but I'm not going to sit there and tell people, well, if you're not sure, spend money on it. My recommendation is don't spend a stinking penny on it. And if you have HBO Max, watch it then if you feel like getting ticked off. If you're that desperate for content, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not. Would I like more Green Lantern content? Yes, but it's more important to me that it be good Green Lantern content. And we haven't had that in quite a while.
Yep. Seconded.
Hey, and the last thing I do want to say about it was when the trailer came out, I made some critical commentary about it. And I have to tell you, I don't think we've shared this story. I know you and I and Chad Bokelman from the Lantern Cast had a conversation about it on Twitter and privately. But I got a scolding from a Warner Brothers PR person, basically saying, shame on you for, turning your back on a Green Lantern film, because how often do you get one? And I gave him a rather lengthy diatribe as to why I felt that this movie was not going to be good, all of which turned out to be true. But he came back and just said, I appreciate your insight and your honesty. And, remember our trailer's on the eclipse of the film and we don't want to spoil it. I think it might surprise you. Yeah, it surprised me. All right. But not in the way you might be thinking. But I had to share that Warner Brothers, as much as they don't really pay attention to me, or I don't think they're paying attention to me, they kind of tried to scold me for having an opinion based on a trailer, which that's what a trailer's for, is to help you form an opinion about something, to see if you're going to buy it or see it or go see it in the theater, what have you. Let me touch on that, because that's an interesting point that you brought up. If you're a PR person from WB and you're going out of your way to email somebody, and this guy don't know you from nobody, right? Right.
Myron Rumsey, whatever, he voices his opinion on a podcast. I don't know how this person thinks. So I'm hypothesizing here.
He follows me on Twitter.
Right. Okay. So he follows you on Twitter. Okay. So he sends you an email, or whatever email that content was about, hey, don't trash it, whatever. Let me tell you, Joe Schmo, PR person from DC, what would have been a better tack to follow. Dear Myron, let's open up a dialogue here. And I know since you're a seasoned Green Lantern fan, and you've had the podcast for this many years, and you've got all these fans, and you've read this many books, let's open up a dialogue here on what you think could make this better. Bam. And guess what? You just opened up a dialogue with a PR person at DC Comics, somebody interested in something that you had to say. Granted, it was negative, and that's the only reason he jumped at it, right? I'm going to jump on this because he does have a voice, and he does talk to a lot of people. I want to make sure I get ahead of this because he's saying negative stuff, But he could have approached it in a different way, and he could have approached it in a way, not only that, taking that information back and maybe made it better. Like months ago or 2 years ago when this was first thought of, or whatever.
Right. And I'm sure, Jim Krieg isn't going to reach out to me and say, hey, what do you think about this? I would have been delighted and humbled and honored to have had something like that happen, but I would never expect that. But I can't imagine Jim has a good read on fan service. You go back and watch Green Lantern, the animated series, and you can tell. To think that this story would be just, oh, yay, great, they're doing Emerald Twilight, is clearly not reading the room as far as that goes. And I've seen a number of Jon Stewart fans who aren't happy with the origin being scuppered the way it was and being given Kyle Rayner's origin. They didn't like seeing Hal done dirty like that. They would much rather have seen a buddy cop film too, essentially.
And it could have been brighter. For that matter, it could have been more upbeat. I mean, it was kind of a bleak ending. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, no matter who died at the end, it sucked because it was Hal Jordan. It was more monumental for us Hal Jordan fans. And then like you had said earlier, you're walking away into let's go get some dinner now. I just killed my best friend. I mean, okay, well, you just made that bleak. Thanks.
Yeah, that was handled better in the DC versus Vampires when Batman tried to get Ollie to do something, and Ollie's like, hold on a minute, I just killed my best friend. I need some time here. Yeah. But anyway, I thought it was funny that Warner Brothers, who hasn't talked to me really in a long time now, if you go back 11 years, Warner Brothers was sending me stuff to help promote. They were sending me the clips of Green Lantern, the animated series, to help promote the show. And they were reaching out to me to do interviews with creators and all kinds of things. And that's all stopped. That's all dried up, and it's cyclical, and I get all that. But to have them reach out to me and jump on me and shame on you for having negative thoughts. I'm sorry. That means you cut a really crappy trailer. To get a Green Lantern fan like myself not wanting to see a Green Lantern film takes some work.
Well, not only that, shame on. I'm sorry. Are you going to tell me how I shouldn't have my own thoughts?
Right. I mean, right.
That's why I said open up your dialogue first before you go just jumping on somebody because of you want to shame when you give them. Open up a dialogue saying, okay, well, shame on you, but hold on. Before I say shame, let's at least talk about why.
Right.
Okay, that's why. Let me take back what I said.
Or why not ask why I wasn't happy with it? So I gave him a rather long response and just said, here's what I didn't like about it. Here's why. Here's what I think you guys are getting wrong with this, and so on and so forth. And he basically came back and said, I appreciate the insight and the honesty. But
that's my point, right? He went through all that to contact you. Yet when you gave him the reasonings back, he couldn't run that up the chain of command to say, oh, well, I went out of my way to contact him. He did bring back something that makes sense and is viable information to what we're making. I'm just saying that's the kind of stuff that involves fandom that I think should be taken into account.
Yeah, I mean, I would never expect it unless they were doing a live action film and wanted some input, like target audience type stuff. But
like some kind of historical note. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, it is what it is. But anyway,
it is.
Anyway, we've got some listener feedback. My power ring is blinking. So, my friend, why don't we take a pause and come back and see what our listeners have to say?
Hello, Green Lanterns, Myron and Phil. We have 2 messages for this episode. The first is from Rilo, who has a thought-provoking question for you. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Have fun with this one. What if we reverted to before Johns took over, and you were in charge? What would you do? I know my answer would differ greatly, but I'm interested in if your 2 answers would be more similar.
Hello, Rilo, wherever you may be from. So this is a cool question. I like it. You want to revert to before Jeff Johns took over and I was in charge. What would I do? I got an idea. I think I would do a Hal Jordan Kyle Rayner book. I think it'd be kind of cool. I think back then it would have been kind of fun to do. What do you think, Myron?
Yeah, I think there's some different opportunities to do things. If I were back to, if I were in charge and we're talking back before Johns came back, so it's pre-Emerald or before Green Lantern Rebirth. So Kyle's still the only Green Lantern. I would still bring Hal back. I don't know if I would do the Parallax bit. You and I just did an episode talking about Lord Malvolio, and I would probably default to the Lord Malvolio plot just because that was a prevalent fan theory. Whether you could actually legally do that or not, I don't know. But I would basically find a way to bring Hal back. And I think I would bring Guy back as well, and maybe John, just because I think the problem we still have is we have too many Green Lanterns, and I certainly wouldn't create any Green Lanterns beyond the 4 that we had. But I think I might... Go ahead.
The 4 corpsmen.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't go beyond the 4 corpsmen. That's for sure. But I would definitely bring Hal back. I'm not sure how I would treat Kyle. Part of me is like, would it be great for his character arc? Would it be fitting for him to sacrifice himself to bring Hal back? Or would it be better to have him come back and have them be like a brother dynamic? And I'd be fine with, to tie in with what you were saying, I would be fine if we'd brought Hal back, partnered him with Kyle, and left Guy Gardner with his Voldarian powers, and John, I think was still a Green Lantern at that point, wasn't he? I know at one point he was in a wheelchair and then Hal brought him out of his wheelchair. I don't know as if he had a power ring. I don't think he did, but I can't remember. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I would have made him a Dark Star and kept him a Dark Star just because he's a character that I feel needs to have his own identity. And the problem is, as long as he's still going to be Hal's backup, that's his origin story, and that's as much as he goes. He's never going to step out from underneath that, no matter how much Jeff Thorne wants him to. You need to give him something different. And that's what I did like about his time as a Dark Star, because it did give him a different identity. It played off of the military background that we kind of saw, that kind of stuff. Right. That'd be kind of the way I'd go with it. Would I have been smart enough to come up with the emotional spectrum? Probably not, but I probably would have gone back and done some of Hal's older villains. I definitely would have liked to have seen Black Hand rejuvenated in some way, because I always thought he was goofy before, but I would have played off of some of those things, and I would have made it a lot more cosmic, definitely. And I think I would have had the book co-star Hal and Kyle, and maybe still done a Green Lantern Corps quarterly where we could focus on the other members of the Corps. And if it got popular enough, I'd make it a Green Lantern Corps monthly book.
Well, not only that, with a good idea like that, I mean, you could do your quarterly, and then you could do your main monthly book, right? Mm-hmm. And at the end of every 6 months, they could both tie in.
Yes.
You could have like a one shot at the end of the 6 months that they both lead up to, or at the end of a full year, whatever.
Yeah, maybe take the annuals for both series and have the annuals as a tie-over mini crossover event.
Yeah.
I could definitely see that. But I think one of the things I miss more than anything is the focus on some of the alien characters, because I felt like that to me was some of the strongest part of the core concept. And that's where I struggle with the number of Earth Lanterns, because the more we keep adding to the pot, the less spotlight gets shined on these characters, which I think are very cool. I don't think, and I know this is controversial, but I don't think that Jessica Cruz, Simon Baz, Joe Mullane, or Teen Lantern add anything to the mythology that wasn't already there.
The only one I'd argue with was Jessica Cruz. The other three I don't really have a valued opinion on. And I'll only argue that because I like her. That's all. Ever. I mean, I'll back it up, but I don't need to go into that right now. But I like Rilo's question, man. Rilo made us. I mean, that's what's cool about when these guys, listeners call in and stuff, and they make us think of different things. And this was a good one.
Yeah, I agree.
I hadn't considered that.
So, Rilo, thank you for the question. Power Rank, go ahead and play the next message.
For our second message, I received an audio transmission from the Guardians of the Universe. Commencing playback in 3, 2, 1.
Hey, podcast of Bova. This is Guardians of the Universe on Facebook. Just want to give you guys a great shout out. Thank you for keeping the Green Lantern community alive. Love the show. I don't agree with everything you guys say, opinion based, but I love all the recounting of the older stories and the little Easter eggs that Myron explains here and there. I love that. Keep up the good work, guys.
All right, Guardians of the Universe, thank you for the voicemail. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to drop a line to us. And yeah, we're not always all going to agree. Everybody's got an opinion, and they don't always align with each other. So, it's cool. And I hope when people listen to our opinions and they're contrary, they don't see that as a controversial or confrontational, I guess is the better choice of words. It's certainly not confrontational. Everybody's allowed to have their opinion. We're just here expressing ours. And if they line up, that's great. If they don't, maybe it lets people think different perspectives. I don't know. And that's why we like having listener feedback, because it gives us different perspectives as well.
And at the end of the day, it's good to have it's not bad to have good dialogue. I mean, opinions are going to vary. That's just the common nature of the way humans work, and hell, I don't care about the person's opinion next to me just as much as the person next to them. I mean, you all can have those opinions just as much as I can. But that doesn't mean we can't have an open dialogue to say, okay, well, you think this, I think this. Let's talk about it. I mean, that's what I miss about good fandom. Back when comic books, and I think you would reflect this. I mean, when you talked about comic books and you talked about who the best superhero was, when you're around all your friends or around all your other buddies when you were collecting back then, you didn't have that sense of this one is better than that one. You know what I mean? This hero's better than that hero, or this guy can beat that guy up. Well, fandom nowadays has such a schism with what they think should be a superhero number one and who they think should be better number two, let alone they think they have the market cornered on what they think the representation of their hero should and shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think
that causes a lot of problems.
I think people in general, we live in a very polarized society, no matter what the topic may be, whether it's pop culture or politics or what have you. It's very polarizing. I remember as a kid, there's that traditional conversation, who would win in a fight, Batman or Superman, right? But as kids, we would debate those things, but it was like we never came to blows or yelled at each other about it. At least I never did. To me, it was always a back and forth. Well, what about this? And what about that? But nowadays, it's like if somebody has a differing opinion, you tar and feather them. And it's like, no, I'm open to listening to people's opinions. Be respectful of them and be respectful of your own opinions and express them in a way that you hope doesn't tick somebody off.
Well, look what they do with some of the actors and the actresses in some of these situations they're in. I mean, the female from the Obi-Wan series. I mean, none of these actors or actresses go into this saying, yeah, I'm going to do this just so I can piss fandom off so they can send me death threats. Really? I mean, come on, man. You could not agree with somebody and still be level-headed enough to not send somebody a death threat or not be that hateful about it. It's not that bad. But fandoms, man, I mean, the way you guys are with toxicity in this environment, they get really heated when it comes to stuff. I mean, you and I have conversations about Green Lantern, Beware My Power, whatever, and what we should or what we think it should and shouldn't be. But we don't go overboard with it. We don't sit there and say, we don't sit there and go, yeah, those guys over at Lantern Cast, man, they're all wrong. I hate Chad. Grrr. We're right, you're wrong. That's not the way this podcast is, people. We're just here to give you what we think. We still like everything anyway, and we're still living all together, and I'm going to like your opinion just as much as anybody else. It doesn't mean I have to agree with it.
I think sometimes it's a double-edged sword, because in order for these properties to succeed, you have to have people who either are just along for the ride of the stories, or they're emotionally invested in the characters. If you look at any fandom, Star Trek, Star Wars, superheroes, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? But there's a certain amount of emotional investment. So then the problem is when something happens you don't like, you react emotionally because you're emotionally invested. But if you weren't emotionally invested, those properties wouldn't be successful enough to be seeing the things we're seeing with them anyway. So it's really a double-edged sword. But
it is.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for the voicemail, Guardians of the Universe. Power Ring, why don't you tell everybody how they can be a part of the show?
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofoa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
This is Giancarlo Volpe, producer of Green Lantern, the animated series, and you're listening to the Podcast of OA.
All right, well, Beware My Power, we muscled through it. I think we did rather well by being not too harsh and too critical of it, but we needed to be on certain points, and that's all I'll say.
Yeah. To me, it's an honest evaluation. It's certainly a passionate one for both of us because we care about the properties. It goes back to that whole topic of emotional investment. If we didn't care, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing right now.
And I will challenge this though, and to any listeners out there, and if I'd like your opinion. The things we focused on with Beware My Power, why we didn't like it, were legitimate reasonings. If you don't think those are legitimate, I would actually, and I mean this, I want to know why you think it was a good idea, or you think it was a good idea that John Stewart got somebody else's origin story. Those might be nitpicky little things, but sometimes fandoms fight over nitpicky little things, and in order to get to the crux of why we do and do not like things, open up the dialogue. I'd be curious to see if people had the same opinion of those specific reasons of why it wasn't that great.
Right. I agree.
It seems to me like the most of fandom would, or most of fandom would just glaze it over and be like, it doesn't really matter to me.
Right. Right.
Anyway.
So we'll be back in a few weeks. I'm going to put a questionnaire out on our Facebook group of different topics and see what they would like us to talk about for the next episode, because according to the most recent solicitations, it's going to be at least November before we get a Green Lantern book again, at least. So we'll see. So I'm going to put some topics out there. I'll pick a few out of a hat, throw them out there, see what people want us to talk about. Until next time, treat each other well, keep your power ring charged, be bright out there, and make every day your brightest day. Take care, everybody. The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the Blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.